Welcome members and friends of SAIAshare. Sorry for the slightly delayed start. I think everybody is experiencing load shedding at various levels today, and we're sort of connecting and clicking in as fast as we can. My name is Gillian Ardendorf. I'm the Vice Chair of the SAIA Practice Committee and Practice Architecture in the Eastern Cape, Port Elizabeth. Eugene Barnard and I will be hosting this afternoon. SAIAshare is an initiative of the SAIA Practice Committee, and it is intended to inform and motivate members and all persons who love architecture. SAIAshare is held on the first Friday of every month. I suggest you all load them into your calendar and look out for them. Also check your junk mail, because sometimes they do disappear there as well. I want to thank Karina Gibson from ECPD for guiding you through the procedures of the background, and then also very importantly to thank Angelo Pillay from Juravit, our kind sponsor. We have two exciting programs lined up for you this afternoon. In the second session this afternoon, we have Tazeen Razak, who'll be sharing on a very interesting topic, defend or include, a thought-provoking presentation on the spatial transformation that is creeping into our built infrastructure within our cities. She is currently a director at Lemon Pebble in Johannesburg and focuses on the social injustices and is passionate about architecture and passionate about the spatial transformation of the environment. But firstly, we'd like you to meet Rudd van Deventer, who is well known to many of us as an active practice member, national practice member. Rudd, welcome. We are always pleased to have you with us. Rudd worked at Barclays National Bank first before he started Spaceworks in Johannesburg. We all know that later as First National Bank as their group architect for 10 years, where he was involved in the initiating of the facilities management as a discipline. And he has worked extensively in this field, strategic facility planning for corporate clients. Rudd's long-term experience supporting his clients with existing buildings has provided him with a unique insight. Today, Rudd will share with us on the subject, overlooking assets, the asset that every architect has in their building documentation, and how to turn this into another revenue stream. So after that short introduction, I'm going to hand over to Rudd. Welcome, Rudd, and we look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Gillian, and Eugene for the occasion to set these up. I think they're going down very, very well with everybody. I'll start my presentation. Hope you all can see this. We've run an unusual practice for quite a long time, mostly inspired by myself being very interested in what happens to buildings after they get built and how they get used. Back in all the way time when I was responsible for First National Bank's property design portfolio. Okay, where we started was every project must come to an end at some point, and essentially architects are required to hand over documentation, and my involvement has been with receiving a lot of that documentation when we've worked with owner-occupiers who work on their own premises. Their investment in staff has been huge, and one gets a fair idea of where costs are sitting in a building, and we've worked with that, and I'll go a little bit through that. We follow the money a little bit later. So when Eugene asked me to give a talk for SAIAshare, this aspect of our business came to mind first. Bit unusual, but it's what we do. So stage 6, we talk about the standard service, which is provide a client with a construction record documentation and the relevant technical and contractual indications by the contractor and subcontractor. I mean, what can be more simpler than that? In the old days, it was simply printing all the documents and then handing them over to the client, and off you went left stage. So then CAD came along, and we as architects have really enjoyed that. It's made it much easier for us to manage the tail end of the contract. But or providing PDF prints to replace the paper prints. But what has happened in the meantime, there's been quite a lot of resistance by many in order to hand over electronic documentation, and drawings have been blown so that the information is not really there to be used afterwards. And this has really been a little bit of an effort to get proper documentation for many of the older buildings. People change and stuff gets lost, as we always know. There's very few clients who would really reuse an architect's documentation without talking to him. So they're trying to push things about resisting handover of decent documentation is a little bit of a dead end for an architect. So from our perspective, we've always looked at why this was important. And building services require a lot of maintenance. These things survive many, many years. And although in South Africa we have very few buildings that are really more than a couple of 100 years old, overseas there's very, very many more. And this task of managing the building through its extended lifetime is taken by the facilities managers. They used to be the guy upstairs in the attic with a flat on the top of the roof, but they are no longer. They're now quite technically skilled in a lot of ways. But their job is important for them to have the right information. And there are lots of little aspects, like the simple example here is the cleaning contract requires information on the size and finishes of all the spaces that need to be cleaned. That information is never really available from the construction documentation, and it really has to be built up by the architect, by the facilities manager over the time while they will look after it. So as-built documentation is not really that suited to the management of the facility afterwards. Over the lifetime, many, many people will work in the building, work around the building, and this is critically important as stuff goes west sometimes. Just to give you an idea of how a building, this is now a little cycle just showing you the facility replacement cycle over 90 years of a building. And if you take a look at it, I've broken it down. The construction period, normally the first 5 years or so, sometimes a lot less, but the major buildings will be quite a long time. You then have what we term there as scenery, and scenery itself is the pieces in the building. So it's the furniture and the drywall and all the other bits and pieces, which are about a 5-year cycle. Motors and control equipment are about a 15-year cycle when they need to be refurbished. And a lot of the major services are from 20 years on, they require replacement. The external facade needs to be refurbished after about 30 years in most cases. So all of these things are parts that need to be built on in the building. And this concept comes back from a book called How Buildings Learn by Stuart Brand. And it's in response to quite a bit of writing by Frank Duffy. Okay, so following the money, if you take a look at the first part, which is the architects, their dream and their design and their build of the building, essentially over a 30-year period of the building, that amounts to about 2%, which is the construction cost. Looking after the building, paying for the electricity and the services and everything else, is about 8% of the operating cost. But 90% of the cost is involved in keeping the staff happy. And as the time extends beyond the 30 years, obviously the 2% is going to start decreasing as maintenance and repairs and that start to add. But the general thing is that it's overwhelmingly, the building is built to do things inside, look after your staff and those things. Okay, so we go back and say, does your client need construction document? What is the purpose of handing these over to the thing? What the documents will be used for by the client? What are you as architects obliged to supply, and to what detail? And then the everlasting question of what about your IP? Different views the different views are dependent on who's going to use your property. A private client would really like a nice set of plans, either PDF or paper prints that he can keep for his house. So if he ever needs to look for something or do some repairs or anything else like that, he has it. A developer will be also interested in a set of documentation. They'll also most probably ask for renderings for the sales of their document. But in the longer term, they're going to back out of the ownership of the building quite a bit. Corporate clients are where we see the opportunity for architects to be there. They need construction documentation to start off with, and then they need the documentation to look after that building in all the years and through all the phases that I've explained to you. If you take a set of construction drawings and we see how they start off, first off we have as-built documents. From them we convert them to get to what we call a facilities management base drawing. That's whittled down information which really supports most of what the building is about, and not necessarily that in intimate detail. We've lost a lot of the construction notes. We keep some of the information on that, but it's down to a good idea of what the building fits like, what materials are in it, mostly done in line and pen thicknesses. And then the next phase is us adding the space and occupants. So we go through all of the details on the space, collect that, who's owning what space, and so that the management and they can then determine what the charge out is. That becomes a great aspect. And then the final piece is the equipment and services, which are then identified and installed in each of these particular areas. Normal handover, update the working drawings, PDF format, other certificates, we've talked about that. So the key thing about we're talking to do and what we're promoting at the moment is how do architects provide this something different to the client? And it's really, really quite important to keep the client on your side and not come across as a bit of a gatekeeper or a rent seeker. If you isolate the client's information and try and keep him from it or try and play hardball with him, they're not going to appreciate that and you're going to lose out. So the information needs to be electronic to survive paper moths and all of those sort of things. And automatically CAD would spring to mind for most of us. The difficulty with CAD is that it is, or should I say, we'll deal with CAD afterwards. I want to talk first of all just to handle the issue of BIM, because BIM has been the exciting bit on the block. It's particularly for facilities managers, and the information is available through BIM using a protocol called the Construction Operations Building Information Exchange, or COBE, which is short for it. This allows somebody with a BIM project to export the vast majority of the information required for managing a building in a database. The problem with BIM is the software is quite expensive, it's quite difficult to use, and it's really a little bit unsuitable for the FM world where they're mostly in 2D format and there's a lot of Excel worksheets. So the construction documentation exported quite nicely from BIM will give you most of what you require. Sorry, I just lost the third. Sorry about that. There's a bit of a frog in my throat. So with BIM, the easiest fallback position is really to provide 2D floor plans from the PDF, from the model in PDF format, and then that can be used in a conventional fashion by the facilities managers if there isn't a good system that can take in the COBE information. With the acceptance of ISO 19650 by SAPS, the Southern Bureau of Standards, recently, they have accepted the part 1, which is to do with the concept and principles, and part 2, the delivery phase of the assets. So that's for architects. We've got what we need out of it, and they're busy with a vote for the phase part 3, which is the operational phase of the assets, which will really tie into this. And this will put a little bit more pressure on most architects who are involved in BIM to get involved. One needs to always issue a little bit of a warning with people involved in BIM, particularly if the client is asking for BIM plans or sort of BIM model for them to manage the building. This is quite a risky thing, and it is best to issue these things with more of a footstoot handling for the client, so that it's a buyer beware, unless you're really, really skilled at what you're doing. Okay, so we go back and deal with CAD. So the general arrangement drawings are the actual basis of what we use. We use a layering system, which is based on the old SAISFB system, which essentially puts all the elements into first 100 layers inside a drawing, and we can manage it. And we're busy migrating to Uniclass 2015, which is one of the categorization systems employed in the UK. We use pen lines and line thicknesses differentiate between things kept on the same layer. So you'll have all your walls on the same layer, and you might have partitions in a thinner pen or different color, and that handles it. We keep all the information, IT, fit out information, desks, everything else in the same drawing. And by using the layers, we can then filter that information to produce different drawings. We've lost the notes and the detailed drawings, so it's mostly about the GA. We tend to spend quite a bit of time collecting the drawings from the other disciplines, so we can put them all into it. So the objective is to cater for everybody's work inside one particular file, and then we export that in a PDF format with all the layers switched on. So after the client, the facilities manager gets this, he can then filter his own information quite easily. For this talk, we're staying away from the guys who are really deeply into this with their digital twins, or if somebody has set themselves up with really good software, IT and IT systems to handle it. So for recommendation for architects is to get to know the facilities team or the office manager. The office manager is simply the facilities manager who doesn't know what's happened to him yet, and he has the responsibility for the work without necessarily getting the money or recognition for it. Discuss the requirements with them, as they might be unaware of just exactly how you can help them. But normally it's all about space, and your normal space schedule that you prepare for a construction job is not up to the task. You need to get a lot more detail. You need to get the space IDs in there, and you need to understand who's occupying what piece of space and where it is. What's also useful is a lot of businesses have asset management systems in place, and they need to track these assets. And that's something you can assist the client with. So for an example, we're looking at the Wits University for Health Sciences. We were asked to do a strategic facilities plan for them to understand what was going on. Just to give you some basis of what was there. 11 levels. We excluded the animal research on the bottom floor. There's nothing to do with it. Approximately 63,000 square meters of office space. In this summary, we didn't know how many spaces we had in the beginning. We ended up in nearly 3,400 different identifiable spaces. And this includes all manner of things, from lecture venues all the way to hazardous biosafety labs and everything. Using the HEMIS, the higher education system, there's some 84 different categories of space. That's based on cost recovery and budgeting, so we had to do that. There were some 128 different departments involved, which needed to charge back and know where they were. And there were some 1,300 staff who are fixed staff involved in the business. That excludes the students and everybody else. So this is what the plan ended up looking like. If you go zoom in a little bit on that, you can see that each identifiable area has got a color code, which is the department. It has got information. At top there is the room ID, so we can track the building down. It's got a function according to the categorization of the area. It's got the description of the area, and it's got the area itself on that. All of these items can then be exported to spreadsheet, but there's also additional information which was attached to the objects in the drawing, which are the building, the level, the owner, and the category. So we start off, the first export is really about each and every area, and this is just one page on a very, very long spreadsheet. Each area is identified, and we have that list. We work back against that in order to ensure that we can get the right information. With databases, it's very difficult, and you have to always use exactly the same code for any place if you want to track it throughout there. So there's always these lookup tables that we are using. Finally, we end up with something of summary, which is then the departmental table, which then shows how much space each and every department has got in the space, the organizational codes, and they can track down and work with that. Okay. The outcome of this was that the assessment was used by the faculty management, so they could understand how many or what the space was used by every single department. They knew where the departments were. They then could have a look at which departments needed to expand, which needed to get smaller, and they could sort out their future projects and their alterations. This is now incorporated into the WITS facilities management software, but the outcomes were pretty good. They managed to trigger some projects. They also managed to get some projects there was a little bit of a debate about moving. So these things all worked out well. Next example is really coming back. As we were looking at the building, we then had to deal with some of the spaces were in the Johannesburg Hospital, the Charlotte Maxeke Hospital next door. So we had to look at this as well, and we spent us a long time trying to find examples and information. So the handover there was about 44 years ago. When we eventually found the document, there was an archive room and one of the parking floors, and it had approximately 12,000 paper documents there. There were some 20 cabinets, hanging cabinets there, full of files from all the disciplines. Everything, single thing was there. It's a highly modular precast structure, service intensive, as most people, any architect who's designed a hospital will understand just how problematic this can be. What we also found is even negligible electronic information beyond the asset management. So we had a look at this lot and we thought this was an opportunity for us. I just want to take you through the demo. Sorry, I just need to close this down. Oh, the one window is now closed. Sorry, I seem to have lost the demo. Give me a moment here. Okay, can just give me feedback if everybody can see this.
Rod, we can see your screen. It says Charlotte Maxeke Joburg Academic Hospital.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I was just worried the demo got lost somewhere in there. So in order to present with them, what we did is we prepared this rough job. So taking a look at, we took with the 12,000, we just had a couple of documents that we had scanned. So in order to do a presentation, we then went through and took the scans that we did do for them, and we set up this system, which was just explained. So if anybody goes over any of these drawings, you can see that there is many drawings, and each one then pops up a little display of each and every drawing as we go through the system. So that then covers all the floors, the levels. We had the blocks. So we did the showing which block. So the building was designed around a number of blocks. And there's also a key plan. So we did all these hot links in the drawing to take with them through it so they could see something that went down. Okay, so that was the Charlotte Maxeke. What happened? We go back to the SAIAshare. What happened was that was turned down. They were we were told it was too expensive, and that was it. The system fire broke out on the 16th of April in the hospital. The team pointed. They stated that there were no drawings available. and we had a dispute with that. We went back, and then finally they came back and said, no, they're now going to do everything to do all the existing documentation, scan 3D, and they're still going to need the drawings. So it's one of those things that is a lost opportunity there. There's a nice example, if you look carefully, of the University of Stellenbosch, where they took the existing drawings and they did a point cloud of the whole building, and they produced that. So if you want to do a bit of research, I've got some links on that. Okay, so all of this got us thinking, and what we started to look at is we prepared a pro forma for an example that we could use for any particular client. We had a requirement for the drawings. Working with WITS again, there were many buildings that are really old and have a lot. And we've worked on a lot of the buildings in WITS. And every single time we work on a building, there's a difficulty locating information on these existing buildings. And the plans are missing due to misfiling and loans and stuff. So we put together this demonstration. So this is really, it's marketed at the moment for WITS, but that's not necessarily just a case of checking a couple of the logos and doing everything else. But if one takes a look at the start, we have a thing by campus. So if it's another client who has a whole lot of different campuses or anything else, you can select which campus you want to work through, and this is just some examples. And then you can pick a particular building, and then you go through that. Within the building, what we do with the data, we have a database which is exported to an XML file, which drives all of this, which is highly technical for a lot of people who are not interested. But we say work then through the drawings, so you can see we worked on a floor basis. We then work on an architectural or the disciplines, and then we have also on the basis of a drawing, working through the drawing, so you can filter across the drawings. This information is vitally important to any client, and I think it's one of the things that gives an opportunity for a lot of architects who have been working for a long time with clients, and they're sitting with this information, which is an unrealized asset for them and for their client. And it really takes a little bit of marketing, and they can earn good money out of this. And that more or less gets me back to the end of my presentation. And we'll have your questions in the various chat boxes and stuff. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Rudd. That was extremely interesting, and now we, I think, all have a lot more respect for what you do. And I think when you say look up, I go, oh, glory, that's what happens in Excel, where I go like panic.
Yeah.
So I think what you have really exposed for most of us architects is that, you know, when we think we've sort of finished at stage 6, we've clearly only started at stage 6. I think my first question would be, you know, generally when we get to stage 6 and we hand over our drawings, that's what we paid for. Then the level that you take it to now is an additional fees. That's a whole new service that you're actually offering. And I'm sure that most architects also feel sort of like I do, is that we can hand over an extremely competent set of documents in digital and paper and files and beautifully put together. But the very first time that client wants to paint, they just phone the architect and go, what was the paint color? What was the finish? Who was the engineer? Because nobody actually goes back and looks at the documentation. They don't look at what you've been given. So I like the idea that you say, find out who is going to be in managing that, and maybe spend a bit of time with that person, educate them how to use the information you've given them. But I still think my question would be, is like, how do you encourage the client at that point to pay you for those additional services? Because it's you know, it's that scope creep. When we get to stage 6, our clients sort of scope creep on us for years. How you know, for you it's a separate practice, but for us it's going to just be a scope creep. How do we manage that?
Well, I think that what we've done is it's always been quite distinguishable with us, in that it's actually been another step. So when we've handed over the drawings, that's one part of it, and then we actually show them a different thing. so then we start showing them a database, and we start showing them some of the other drawings, some of the other technical stuff. So it's not the scope creep. It's, we make a very, very clear differential that this is additional services. And if they, that's why we did the demo, because if they don't bite, then we walk away. If he doesn't want to buy, that's fine. But if he does want to buy, then you've got something that's a little mechanism with a bit of work. You can add your drawings into it very easily. You've done all the PDFs, you've done everything else. And then you can add stuff like the paint colors and all the other, put it in there, all the consultants, you'll know all the consultants are. That it builds up the database, and there you are. And this will be X number of rands. Thank you. So you need to think about it as being a separate job, not a continuation and scope creep.
Lillian, I wonder whether we can ask Rudd the question that came through from Kathleen Weston. I don't know whether you have it on the screen.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it.
Okay, let me read it to you, Rudd.
Okay.
Are you aware of any FM firms in South Africa who actually have BIM capabilities, both software and staff, or full on IWFM systems, who can actually use handover info in a meaningful and integrated way? Or do you find that it is all still quite siloed and separate?
Okay, so the one company we work with is PlanOn, and they've got a system for importing the COBE, and COBE is the IFC-based data, so that's the data format. It's really up to the clients, and you'll find a lot of the clients aren't that skilled, it's why BIM has been a bit scary for them. So that's why it's mostly spreadsheets and PDF files of drawings. So there's not a lot. Most of the bigger systems in the country can all take on that information from BIM. So it's, they've got the background to do it, but once it gets back into their systems, they then have to start using it. And most of the time it just gets converted then into two-dimensional information and the database.
Okay, thanks, Rudd. Gillian,
Okay,
that last.
Yeah, I see there was another question here. What are the minimum requirements for handing over stage 3 level, especially handing over digital drawings, which are intellectual property of the architects? This is from Luigi. We recently were asked to cancel that clause in the SAIA architect-client agreement so that the design becomes the property of the client.
Essentially, it's that one slide that I had right at the start. There was a little bit of text there. That's essentially what you're committed to doing, supporting the client on that. Further than that, nothing really. I would have a little bit of a problem with a client who asked me to hand over the intellectual property on a building that could be repeated. If it was a standalone single entity or something like that, which was more an artwork than architecture, then I wouldn't have so much of a problem. But for something like a house that he wants to buy once and build many, I would have a problem with that client.
Okay.
Okay,
Gillian,
then Raj,
maybe we can.
that Ivan's question. Sorry, you there too.
Carry on.
What do you charge for your services? I find clients want it for free, but I think Ivan, everybody wants everything for free. but I think the question is, how do we structure costs for a service like this that you would offer? How is it structured?
Well, we've been at it for quite a while. So essentially what we do is we base it on time spent. So it's an hourly setup. So, I mean, the bigger jobs require more money. It's not really a square meter rate. It's a little bit more about how much information is required. And sometimes it's more expensive to add the other disciplines than it is simply to put the stuff in. So we basically do a quick rundown on how much we think it's going to cost us. We've got a bit of buried costs in the system we've already set up, which somebody else would have to cost to do that. And then it's just a case of importing the drawings and loading the database.
Okay, so, and Rudd, we've got very positive responses. Thank you very much, Rudd. What incredible work. And we all go, well done. And then, sorry, Eugene, you know me, I always talk. And then we have Sydney Lefifi asks, hi, Rudd. I noticed that nothing was captured on the WITS database concerning HEMIS. So I'm a bit blank there, so I'm going to see if you know what he's talking about. Sorry, Sydney.
Sorry, I'm not 100% sure. On A?
He's got
HEMIS.
HEMIS in capitals. So HEMIS, yes.
Oh, HEMIS. No, the HEMIS was inside all of that. That's all the categorization was HEMIS.
Okay, cool.
We categorized on function and we categorized on HEMIS.
So maybe Rudd, for those of us that are blonde, you can explain that a bit more.
No, it's a system used by the higher education, so that they've categorized it, and depending on the amount of space for each of those categories, the funding is different. So it's actually a very critical component to have as part of your database.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay.
We're going to move on.
Yes.
Thank
Julian,
you.
I think that, yeah, let's hear from the sponsors, Rudd and Julian, and then it's our second presentation.
Yeah.
Thanks, Corina.
I guess it always starts with the functionality. My goal is that what I create should be for many people. In general, I'm quite fascinated by earthen colors, and actually there are more colors in nature than you would actually believe, sometimes really powerful colors. If you see this color tableau for the almond, it's not so that one item is the exact same color as we ended up using, but it's like a soup of colors. It's crucial that you can recognize yourself in the product you did, like looking yourself in the mirror. Doing these tableaus is also, that's a treat for me. I love doing those, so it's also something I treasure doing. It's fun.
Right, colleagues, welcome back, and a word of welcome to those who've just joined, or not just joined us, but joined us since the first welcome at the beginning of SAIAshare. We trust you've enjoyed the first presentation, and now we look very forward to presentation number 2, and I'd like to introduce you to Tanzim Razak. Tanzim, welcome. Nice to have you with us. Tanzim is the director and founding partner of the practice Lemon Pebble Architects in Johannesburg. She's a Wits graduate, and she attained her MArch, and may I say cum laude, Tanzim, in human settlements from the Catholic University in Belgium. That must have been quite an experience. Tanzim is a passionate advocate for spatial transformation in South Africa. It's a very, very topical subject, and we're looking forward to engaging on this matter. She currently heads a creative team that works on creating public buildings and housing within the post-apartheid urban context. And colleagues, expect Tanzim to rattle your cage a bit. Occasionally you come across people who give you an interesting perspective on matters that you haven't thought much about. And Tanzim is going to do that. She addresses the topic, defend or include the dichotomy of our city. So Tanzim, once again, thank you very much, and over to you.
Yeah, Eugene, thank you very much. Good afternoon, and thank you for hosting me on this platform. I just want to switch off my my video so that I can get some bandwidth. Okay, so I've always felt this extreme tension, or maybe even a contradiction, in how we try to design our cities and the actual physical reality of how we experience the everyday. We design to include, but the reality is our city is one of defense. So a recent incident on social media brought this dichotomy into sharp focus. A Pretoria man was recently fined 1,500 for planting a cabbage and vegetable patch outside his home on the pavement. There had been a complaint, and the Tshwane Metro Police responded by telling the man, if you don't remove this garden, the law will be unleashed on you. The officers initially indicated that he had the option of going to the council to get permission, or the other option was to rather plant roses or trees. So the gentleman, preferring to keep his cabbage patch, went to the council and was told that he didn't have to have a permit, but rather he could plant anything at his own risk. A later post indicated that he was fined 1,500 rand with the arrival of 5 Tshwane Metropolitan cars and a total of 16 police officers after his social media post went viral. So this way the struggle internet was handled was in stark contrast to my own experience. A few years ago, a local residents of my hometown complained to the councillor over paving of a key intersection of my hometown in Actonville. To put the area in context, the entrance to Actonville is a major circle that is a junction between two schools, a church, a petrol station, and it's part of a key industrial area on one of its sides. The pavements have an intense pedestrian activity, as you can imagine, and that result hosts established informal traders who have been training for years here with fruits, snacks, and food for passerbyers. So upon the arrival of a large food chain, the area was fenced off and 3 meters of pavement was appropriated by them by the provision of 1.5 million of a paved walkway and landscape that consisted of sharp-edged rocks that were cemented into place and displaced all the traders. 1 meter access to the road was created on 2 edges. Some traders reappropriated the space by appropriating the paving for the pedestrians. Residents complained we did no response as the council did it acceptable as the bylaws of creating access for pedestrians were complied with and had gained council approval. So the sheer hypocrisy of these two incidents brings to mind the Handbook of Tyranny by Theo Deitinger, which I reference in this talk. In his book, he documents the veiled world of security we live in and asks the reader to grasp the forms of cruelty in use that limits our freedoms. He outlines that since land has changed from being territories into nation states, we have handed over our individual freedoms to become citizens in return to be protected by the state. This has in turn created a world where permission is needed to move around depending on the citizenry you have through a visa system. But the visa world is quite limited, as you can see. A visa-free world is only limited to a number of small islands and countries. The passport system is also a system of wealth. Rich countries have ability to deny access from poor countries, people from poor countries, even if they come for the purposes of tourism. Anyone in South Africa with a South African passport and wanting to travel to the UK will attest to the level of scrutiny and documentation requested. However, rich people from poor countries have access by buying citizenry. Citizenry in Singapore, which is one of the most accessible countries as well, is available to be bought if you have 1.5 million euros available. So Germany and Singapore have the most powerful passports, have access to 159 countries around the world. South Africa sits somewhere midway at 94 countries, but mostly don't have access to Western states. And the Afghanistani passport gives access to a mere 22 countries. So in order to protect the nation state, borders are created. And some countries have stronger borders than others, like the US-Mexican border, which we all aware of, where Trump has strengthened in order to keep immigrants out. In South Africa, we have a border between Zim and Zimbabwe and Zimbabwe and Botswana. However, as we highlighted in one of the most interesting subjects of border posts and wall is the Gaza Strip, which is the city of Gaza, which is highlighted in the insert below. So Gaza is the most fenced out territory in the world. It's 1.8 million citizens, 100% cut off from its neighbors, Israel and Egypt. And as a guise for self-protection, Israel has fortified around 80% of its land borders. However, only 15% follows the green line set out in the 1949 Armistice Agreement, and 85% of the wall at times cuts about approximately 18 kilometers into Palestinian territories. So while the conflict between and the wall between Israel and the West Bank is quite documented, the 8-kilometer wall between well known is less obvious is the barrier between Egypt and Gaza on the right, who are actually not in conflict. 8 meters above the ground and 18 meters below the ground to prevent tunneling and to deter illegal immigrants passing through. So whilst our own national borders are constructed with less care, in 2020, Minister of Public Works commissioned a new fence along the Beitbridge border post between South Africa and Zimbabwe at a cost of about 37 million during the COVID lockdown in order to limit access from our neighbors, by our neighbors. Within weeks, it was breached, and now the construction of the fence is now under investigation. Lately, the ministry has now said that the fence won't be repaired as it would be wasteful expenditure, but rather a new, more robust fence is being explored, including the latest technology. It's clear that our national borders are much more fragile than our neighborhood ones. I didn't even have to travel outside my own town to find a far more robust protective walls, as indicated by the 6-meter high wall enclosing parts of affluent areas in Benoni. So as South Africans, we are no strangers to the defense of city. The apartheid city plan, which remains in structure of a city, was inherently designed to protect the interests of the minority in power. And was the buffer zones around the racialized residential areas were intended as barriers to keep those deemed as undesirable out and preventing access to opportunity in the center, except through the permit system of the past. Townships also had an extreme military installation near them, with Actonville having an air base adjacent to it. So what is not so readily documented is apartheid city was a form of a militarized control, where townships were designed as having a single access only, so that protests could be easily expunged by blocking off that entry point, including the military that were associated with it. Roads were wide enough for Caspers to maneuver, and a memory which was brought back during hard lockdown personally, where Caspers returned to maintain control of our townships. However, the suburbs remained relatively unchecked, as confirmed by my family living in the tree-lined suburbs, who were able to enjoy the lush gardens outside without any military checks. So as per the apartheid city, Dating Up maintains that the defensive measures adopted by today's cities mainly targeted the enemy within. Besides the threat of terrorist attacks, there is a much less violent enemy to the city, the ordinary citizen. This level of control remains where our everyday movement is under constant surveillance and is curtailed. I didn't have to go far again to document these restrictive measures. The following images that you'll see are in Newtown, where our offices are based, and Benoni in the areas that I lived. As you can see, pedestrians are pushed aside in terms of in favor of car access. But even the car access is under heavy surveillance through boom gates, cameras, stop signs, guards, lights, cameras, speed reducing trucks, and access control. Public streets are prioritized to gates and barriers, or access is completely closed off. So public routes are also fenced up, as this route in Actonville connecting two spaces alongside a school. Public access being gated off by private citizens, as you can see by the gate in the image in the image on the left, by private citizens, as a pedestrian traffic is deemed to be to make them vulnerable. And however, this disconnects two vital areas of Actonville. Objectives have fallen on deaf ears since the complainants are poorer residents who actually walk. In contrast, though, the more affluent remain unregulated and unperturbed by bylaw violations of pedestrian access through the making of very beautiful gardens. Huge developments are also a regular feature that we all know about that deny access to opulent grand houses. Here, gaining access is so rigorous, it goes beyond border post requirements. In this particular development, the physical barriers remain up, high walls, gates, pikes, cameras, and guards. Then the scanning of personal documentation, the identity document, driver's license, and your car license. And then you need access control and verification, where the resident is called and an access code is given to you for. Personal details are also taken down, your name, your ID, your cell phone, and addresses. But what's more shocking, though, are the restrictions faced by non-residents and employees of private estate dwellers within these developments. I'm not so sure how these passed constitutional muster, but there are some restrictions of movement stipulators in homeowner regulation, not in particular this development, but some of the development that we worked in previously. These ask for temporary domestic workers when upon entry to leave their IDs at the entrance during the workday and only get it back once you leave the area. And more scary is also they are not permitted to walk in the estate unless, which is stipulated elsewhere in the rules, unless walking or being the nanny of children of employees, employees in the area. So through our cities, our movements are heavily under surveillance, as you can see, and restricted through preventative design, both subtle and explicit. Bollards, fences, plantings, spikes, cameras, barbed wire, and even the design of benches hasn't escaped scrutiny. Round benches deter lying on, and armrests on benches prevent people sleeping or prevent behavior that is deemed unwanted. So how do we define unwanted behavior? So unwanted behavior is the accusatory basis for the implementation of subtle design elements that try to influence the use of public space without being noticed. Since unwanted behavior is not a crime, preventative measures are the only way to avert it. So is graffiti unwanted? Is it public art, or is it vandalism? Or is it only how well it's made? So if it's commissioned, is it public art, like the murals of musicians in Newtown? Or is it graffiti if it isn't? Or is the distinction of what is deemed accessible determined by the private citizen and not us as collective society? Deitinga points out a very relevant point, and he says, it's the city government that implements preventative design, but this is done only by popular demand. The city against unwanted behavior is the Western capitalist city, a clean and bloodless construct that works optimally only until the shop closes. Statistically low, we feel safer. The question is, are we willing to exchange our feeling of safety for being more alive? However, in a country as violent as South Africa, we would rather ask, we wouldn't have to compromise our safety, but we would rather ask, how do you create a balance between a safe city and the one that has access for all of us without the creation of walls? So in 2019, our practice, Lemon Pebble Architects and Urban Designers, undertook the spatial development framework of Newtown, where our office is located. So Newtown has over the years had several SDPs done and mostly positioned the area as a cultural precinct. However, the area is quite fluid with its demographics and physical environment constantly changing. Rather than a singular identity, Newtown has been a home to multiple institutions and uses that define it. These include the historic Mary Fitzgerald Square, Sky Bono, the historic heritage buildings, including the Workers' Museum. And we have large-scale buildings that are important public buildings that include the Museum Africa and the Market Theatre, and the Turbine building that now acts as offices for Anglo-American. There's some newcomers, which is like the new Motor City BMW and a Newtown Junction Mall, as well as the long-term and historic inhabitants of the Bree Street shopkeepers, where some peoples have been now lately subdivided into smaller spaces to give access for small-scale trailers. And more importantly, the unrecognized but major stakeholders, those of the trolley pushers and the recycling industry. So Jane Jacobs has said that the capability of providing something for everybody is only because and only when they are created by everybody. So keeping this in mind, we undertook a series of engagements in this project where stakeholders and residents were actively part of the production ideas in a co-production process. The initial engagements were quite challenging in that we needed time to build trust, even though we were part of the community. However, as the process continued, it became a highly productive and creatively rewarding. As you can see, the various sizes of documents, quite formal ones, informal ones where we located ourselves within the area, and then the ones that were advertised, and there were co-production methods. So eventually the outcomes were documented and analyzed. And the bubbles indicator, through a series of these are the outcomes and the comments received, and they were documented. The bubbles indicates the level of responses, and one can see that safety was a major concern, indicating that the need for a safe environment is a universal need and across all demographics, highlighting that the design should create safe spaces without compromising access. Again, the empirical data points at the need for safety, as you can see in the graph above, and physically safe, accessible routes. So it's always been highly documented in a city, especially in South Africa, that South Africans use up to a third of their income in order to gain access to opportunity and get to work. So it stands to reason that limited access increases the cost of a journey, and thereby access to a major design is to create a precinct that is permeable, porous, connected, and accessible to all. So we documented and designed various levels of access within, you can imagine, quite an existing, dense existing area where the vulnerable pedestrian was prioritized, and we linked them back to transport networks and amenities. The movement nexus were created to connect the new and existing pedestrian nexus to upgrade the transport networks. And then we identified the design of existing and open public space network of varying scales and strengthened the existing ones that were underutilized through current spaces and created new spaces, with the street being the major connective element. We identified a hierarchy of character zones and not limited only to those of cultural nature that allowed the varying and diverse clusters to coexist, and we overlapped and strengthened the diversity of the area to include the creative, corporate, cultural, residential, and also those that were and recycling. The structure of the project was to structure the nature and intensify existing and new activities within the land uses and consolidate those through public interfaces and active facades that mediate the public and private into creating an area that's a diverse mixed-use precinct. And these are the strategies that we went of. The first strategy was the creative and movement network. The public open spaces, both new and existing. Acknowledging the proposed character zones and land uses. And then the final strategy of that consolidated the various layers and strengthened the areas of overlap to create a mixed-use precinct that is accessible and hopefully provide easy access to opportunity through a connected precinct. It was an incredible learning process for us, and we ultimately became the translators of space rather than the planners or urban designers through a process of co-production that was both challenging and rewarding at the same time. You can see by the endless walking, failures, successes, number of people we engaged with, and ultimately an SDP that was adopted by the city. So we have to go back almost 60 years to get some learnings. But the ultimate way from Jane Jacobs, but we also, where we know that the ultimate success of the city is not dependent on large-scale master plans, but rather dependent on a small-scale implementation that seeks a balance between inclusion and safety. And as Jane Jacobs pointed out about 60 years ago, a city street that is equipped to handle strangers and to make safety an asset in itself out of the presence of strangers, as the streets of successful neighbors always do, must have three main qualities. There must be a clear distinction between public space and what is private space. And second, there must be eyes on the streets, eyes belonging to those who we might call natural proprietors of the street. The buildings on the street equipped to handle strangers and to ensure the safety of both residents and strangers must be orientated back to the street. You cannot turn your backs or blank sides onto it and leave it behind. And thirdly, the sidewalk must have users fairly continuously. Nobody enjoys sitting on a stoop looking out of a window at an empty street. Almost nobody does such a thing. Large numbers of people entertain themselves off and on by watching street activity. And to paraphrase Jane Jacobs again, the point of cities is the creating of a multiplicity of choice, and in our words, not control. Thank you.
Right, Tanzim, thank you very, very much for what I knew was going to be a cage-rattling, eye-opening presentation. So I invite our audience to submit any comments or questions, and we have already two comments that have come in, Tanzim. The first is from Carl Wright, who says, excellent, thank you. And Nikki D. Hudson, who echoes that, thank you, Tanzim. So, Tanzim, maybe just a question while we wait for our audience to send in any other comments, is as architects, you know, we have not always you know, we work within a given site particular. As an urban planner, I would assume that your reach is much further. But what, in your experience, is the primary challenge in this endeavor and effort to normalize spatial structures and open up and give access? You know, what is the big challenge that we need to overcome?
Yeah, so I concur with you that as urban designers, you have a bigger, not control, because you set up the rules of what a city should do, and you have control over the public spaces. But I think what is architects, what we don't do, we limit our design scope to the edge of the boundary. And what we do, we instinctively do, because our clients ask for it, is put up a wall, a 3-meter wall, and it has spikes, and it's another consideration of pigeon proofing or something. So there's no denial that safety is a major concern in this country. I mean, that nobody, and it's across the board, as I pointed out. But what kind of public interface that we do from private property to public space? So firstly is that wall. Then it's what's the threshold between that? Do you create 10 steps and do you lift the building off the ground that the interface is blank? Or do you make it active that there's eyes on the street? And those are not things that we can embed that in our design, because our clients don't ask. They don't ask for that, and neither are they equipped to understand the impact of that. So I think for us, it's the responsibility for taking control of the public space beyond out towards the faithful and that engagement with the street. It doesn't matter if you're on a 20,000 site or you are on a 200-meter square site. That is our power as architects. Yes, urban planners and urban designers have a bigger scope, but we also from that side looking in, we have a problem when the builder of the maker of those space is not the urban planner. So those are guidelines. The actual makers are the architects who really need to engage with their space. And the irony is that the more we open up space and engage with it, the more safe we become. So we've forgotten that that engagement and eyes on the street.
Thank you. In fact, that picks up on a comment we've just received from Paulo Dematis, pardon my pronunciation there. Paulo comments, I see more and more in my area that people are building walls where we had only fences. And how do we reverse that is his question, but that picks up on what you're actually saying.
So Tasleen, I think, sorry, I want to add to that for you, because when we're talking about the security, we also talking, it's a hen and chicken situation, because the taller the walls are and the more we encapsulate, especially residential, the worse the security problem actually becomes. So as architects, we should actually be encouraging and advising our clients, especially in residential, that 6-meter high security walls are dangerous, which I think is what you've been saying to us.
Absolutely. I think you put your finger on the pulse of things. It's that, yes, we need to educate and reassure our clients, because you can't, if someone's feeling unsafe and vulnerable, and if you don't know another way, a lot of us have grown up in suburbs that already had high walls, so you don't know an alternative unless you travel, and then you have an excuse because those are safer cities. You say they're safer, but they are safer because of very principles of eyes on the ground. So perhaps we need to mediate that and say those walls become fences or clear view, and we start to take ownership and I think a sense of belonging beyond that wall. So when we're planting our trees on the road, I mean, to plant shaded trees is welcome, especially in areas where we don't get any service delivery. So that's welcome. But is that cactus, or is that a beautiful tree that allows someone to sit? And when someone's sitting underneath, are they unwanted behavior? So I mean, I can share with you, even when I was taking these pictures around my sister's neighborhood, I was not accosted, but people came to me 3 times. The guards were more differential because they didn't know, and I was in the car, so I looked like I belonged, but I was taking pictures. So they didn't know whether I was invasive or I belonged. So they were like, "What are you doing here?" And I was like, "I'm doing research." But they didn't understand. They didn't. We were not also equipped with would I belong there or not. And maybe, and I had a constant sense that if I didn't have a car, or if I looked any differently, I might be treated a lot less passively, more aggressively. So when I went into the suburbs and I was taking pictures of them, several neighbors had obviously had cameras on the street, and several neighbors had come out to see what I was up to, but they didn't know what they were going to ask me because I was parked in a public space and I was taking pictures. So I just waved and said, "Hello, uncle, how are you?" And he was a bit shocked that I was engaging with him, got in my car and drove up. But that sense of who do we trust and who belongs and doesn't belong comes from engagement and possibly knowing our neighbors and engaging. Because once you build up this high wall physically, you never get to know who's walking around, who's acceptable behavior and what's not. So I don't think we have the answers, but I think we are empowered because we're the makers of this world, or how our buildings look onto space. And I think we're the ones that need to engage with it because the client will just ask for a 6-meter wall and for sense of safety. But what is that wall made of? We need to decide. Right?
Okay, Tanzim, thank you for that. We have another 2 questions come through. Let's just deal with Sydney's question briefly. What is your view on residential gated communities who focus on securing the community within with a concerted effort going into the point of entry gate or house security / gate, yet failing to address the route or path towards such gated communities? I often wonder what the purpose of securing the estate is while the path of getting to such an estate is left as a hotspot. Your comment?
Yeah, it's a difficult one because when people buy into an estate, I understand it's one is a security, but it's also an aspirational thing. So you can't deny the fact that you want to go into a better space or you want a specific lifestyle, which our public spaces don't allow for. And so, like I pointed out in how our historic townships were designed, they had only one point, and they were to keep people in. But maybe in our estates, they to keep people out. But if that one point or whichever or limited amount of points is breached, then you're done for. And unfortunately, as architects, I think we're very disempowered within this because we come right at the end, and you only have a sense of what you can design within the perimeters of your own site. So there's very little you can do, and I can show you. I mean, that's really offensive and very difficult. Restriction of movement. You have no say. You don't belong there. You don't have land ownership. So what do you do? There's nothing to be done. However, a lot of us architects need to jump the scale that we're not only implementers of space, but that we're the developers of space. So I strongly think that we as architects need to engage in the development of spaces to provide alternative ways. So if you created a cluster of open, diverse, dense housing that created, tenancy that's not limited to entry level, but it's like high-end penthouses with an entry-level, low-income. If you start to merge them as temporary, not temporary, but experimental developments, they start to challenge this. Then maybe we're starting to create alternatives because nobody's going to buy in until they don't see one that works. So I think for us, we just need to appropriate that developer space and create different kinds of spaces.
Okay, great, Tanzim. We've obviously touched on a nerve here. There's some comments that are coming through, and thank you very much for each of the comments. I don't know whether we'll be able to deal with them. Tlalefu Mururi comments, on the integration that is required between government, or let's say authorities and the professional architects and the community And then Althea Peacock comments, more a comment than a question. Many clients also have an aspirational perception where the tall wall is seen as the desirable, as you have already said. Luigi Salemi speaks on the density, also affects security. When living in Europe, I felt safer simply because there were many eyes in the apartment block I lived in. And then Steve Archer comments, after the recent riots and looting here in Hillcrest, our shopping centres have now increased the height of their security fences and have now blocked off free walking areas, giving a greater closed-in area. They state it's insurance related. Then Mujahid Barnes says, I like the fact that you are thinking of opening up urban areas. However, the reality is that we are still living in a dangerous society. Our people are trapped in a constant fearful state. How do we change a fearful mind? Sure. Then Nikki says, Sydney has a point. Nikki, forgive me for not going through that comment. I live in an area that is currently going through the process of gating itself. I understand the need for security, but I have a concern about freedom of movement. So obviously, Tanzim, this is a very, very evocative topic, and I just want to say thank you once again for your sharing your knowledge with us, and let's work towards a mindset which will focus on what role can we as architects play in this whole normalization endeavor. So colleagues, with that having been said, it's now my privilege to just once again thank you, Tanzim and Rud, for sharing their knowledge and experience with us. Thank you to Duravit. Now, Duravit, I've enjoyed their videos so much. I'm going to really miss your videos going forward. Thank you so much. And please, when you think sanitary wear, colleagues, please remember Duravit. You've seen a lot about what they have to offer, and they've been gracious sponsors for the past 3 events. And I'm sure that come soon, they will give us their support once again. We are pleased to announce that proper attendance of this event now earns you CPD Category 1, credits, and they come with no cost attached. So if you have a look at the screen, you will see how you can acquire your CPD certificate. And remember, if you attend 10 events, you will have earned your full 1 credit for the year. So bear that in mind in 2020. And then I just want to remind you that the next event is on the 3rd of December. Please, it's not Christmas time yet. Please diarize the 3rd. And here's a hint. SAIAshare is presented on the first Friday of every month. So when you have received your salary in your bank account every month, then you know it's time for SAIAshare, and you don't pay for it. So we'd love to invite you to register for our next event on the 3rd of December. We have 2 very interesting and knowledgeable speakers, presenters. The first is Emile Paulson. Now, when I speak of what Emile is going to be talking on, I need to remind you that in 1886, there was a farm called Langlaagte. And that farm, the farmer probably struggled to eke out a living until George Harrison discovered gold on Langlaagte. And that started the gold rush. Now, Emile is going to be sharing with us something similar. We are sitting on a pot of gold in the SAIAshare practice guidelines, the compendium of practice guidelines developed. And Emile was part of that development team, and that is accessible at your fingertips. So please come and learn more about that from Emile. And then, if you were to get someone to speak on iPhone and you could get Steve Jobs resurrected, you would listen in. So similarly, if you want to know about the compendium, Emile is the right guy. Then secondly, we have a well-known figure in Al Stratford who's going to be speaking to us about captains, architects as captains of the construction industry. Question mark, question mark, question mark. Al comes from a very interesting background. He was past president of SAIA, and he became an architect through a different route. And he's going to be sharing his thoughts, thought-provoking, stimulating once again, on the issue of us as captains in the construction industry. So, with that, I'm going to bid you farewell. Thank you for joining us. SAIA greetings to every one of you, and see you on the 3rd of